Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Maryland Chamber Foundation's first webinar on promoting equity and inclusion in the workplace. This six-part series presented every other month will showcase best practices for promoting equity and inclusion in the workplace and will feature business leaders from Maryland companies who are already doing their part to drive systemic change in their own organizations and communities. We want to express our sincere appreciation to BG&E for stepping up to be our series sponsor. If you'll join me in taking note of these housekeeping items, we would like to ask you to please ensure that all attendees are muted and in listen-only mode with cameras off. Please add your questions to the live event Q&A section on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the chat feature and type your questions in for our speakers anytime during the presentation. If we are not able to get to your questions, please reach out to the Maryland Chamber at mdchamber@mdchamber.org. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to the Maryland Chamber's resource page, as well as our YouTube channel. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Christine Ross, the President and CEO of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce and the Maryland Chamber Foundation. I'd like to start off today by taking a moment to talk about the business imperative for equity and inclusion. No matter the industry, diversity and inclusion have to be a business imperative, a core part of a company's collective purpose. During today's program, attendees will learn how BG&E, an Exelon company, has built an environment that unlocks the potential of diversity and ensures that the best ideas and practices can emerge and be embraced. By integrating alternative perspectives, companies will gain additional insight into how to solve problems, how to innovate, and how to meet the needs of its customers and communities. Ultimately, these benefits will impact every aspect of your business and, most importantly, your workplace culture. To begin today's program, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Sandy Grace, Vice President, Government and External Affairs at BG&E. Sandy is responsible for shaping and leading and directing the company's position on legislation affecting BG&E's customers. Her organization would include state affairs, external affairs, and marketing, primarily supporting and building strategic relationships with legislatures, local officials, and communities. Sandy reports to the BG&E's Senior Vice President of Government and External Affairs. Good morning, Sandy.
Good morning, Christine. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me just fine. Thank you, Christine, for the introduction, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today from all over Maryland. We are also joined by 4 of my BGE colleagues, whom I will introduce shortly. As many of you know, BGE is Maryland's largest natural gas and electric utility, and we're headquartered in Baltimore. We serve 1.3 million electric customers and 680,000 natural gas customers in Central Maryland. We are a subsidiary of Exelon Corporation, but most of you are deeply committed to equity and inclusion. You're here today virtually because you share the same commitment to leading positive change, both in your own organization and in the community. You also want to ensure that your company can continue to grow and innovate. Well, I have some very encouraging news for you. Equity and inclusion and business growth are completely linked together, and it starts at the top. A recent McKinsey analysis of 1,000 large companies in 15 countries affirms that there is a strong business case for both gender diversity and ethnic and cultural diversity in corporate leadership, and shows that this business case continues to strengthen. The purpose of today's panel is to provide you with some insights into our efforts to address these challenges around equity and inclusion at BGE. We'll dig a little deeper into the business imperative for equity and inclusion and hear about our panelists' real-life experiences related to the work they do to support these important initiatives. And hopefully you'll be inspired to take what you've learned today back to your business. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Each of them leads by example as a champion of equity and inclusion, and they're eager to share some of their experiences with you. Steve Horner is BGE's President and Chief Operating Officer. Steve oversees the day-to-day operations of the company, including safety, reliability, efficiency, customer service, and information technology. Rodney Odoy is BGE's Senior Vice President of Governmental and External Affairs. Rodney leads BGE's legislative initiatives throughout Maryland, and that includes state affairs, external affairs, and marketing. And he also oversees corporate relations and large customer services. Danielle Bradshaw-Lee is BGE's Director of Corporate Security. She oversees local, state, and federal regulatory compliance associated with the physical protection of BGE. And finally, Frank Kelly is BGE's Diverse Business Empowerment Manager. Frank oversees the company's supplier diversity program, and he is responsible for developing the myriad of strategies, processes, and systems that enable BGE to meet its ambitious supplier diversity goals. Again, thank you all for being here today. And I just wanted to remind folks that before we jump into the questions, to please submit your questions, if you have any, into the chat window. So I have a series of questions that I'd like to ask our panelists, and I'm going to direct them to the specific panelists in the following orders. The first question relates to the following. Let's begin with each of you sharing your story on how you've become an advocate for diversity and inclusion. How has this experience helped to shape your understanding and significance of diversity, equity, and inclusion? We could just answer in the following order. Steve, could I ask you to go first, then followed by Rodney, then Danielle, and then Frank?
Absolutely. Good morning. Good morning, Sandy. Thank you all for registering for the webinar today. And I certainly hope that what we're going to share with you will help you and your companies. BGE does not in any way consider our journey complete. We're learning as well. So I look forward to future sessions where we can pick up some hints from each of you in terms of what's been most effective in your companies and your journey. I guess, Sandy, if I understand the question, it goes more to my personal journey. And I was fortunate to grow up in a neighborhood that was very diverse from a number of perspectives, from where people were born to the color of their skin to where they worshiped. And I was raised by parents that first and foremost taught respect for others. And that started with understanding others before judging and to respect people that had views different than your own. And so that was a very rich upbringing. I did not know that that was different than what others were experiencing. It didn't really hit me till I got to college that there were people who had nicknames for different folks from different parts of the world, right? Or that had biases that were so overt, so prevalent in the way they behaved that it actually shut off relationships and opportunities and learning. And I saw that in the dorms when I was first introduced to college and saw, day in, day out people throughout their routines and the types of conflicts that involved, even between teachers and students in terms of them not understanding each other. When I got into the workplace, I was also fortunate to work at a company where it was a much more inclusive company. I came to work for BGE over 30 years ago, and the culture is very much a meritocracy within BGE, where people are judged based on what they can contribute, and folks are offered opportunities to grow and learn. But as I moved into leadership, I felt more compelled to actually speak out and push for more inclusion. And that took the form of a lot of what we've put in place at BGE, which is increased diversity in our recruiting, our hiring, a more intentional effort in the way we interview people and coach and develop folks to make sure that everyone is being given that chance. Because we truly believe within the company, and I truly believe as an individual, that there's talent out there across all races, creeds, genders, you name it, and that we as a company will only be successful if we're an attractive employer to all people. In addition to just bringing people in, that next step is actually including them, and that speaks to all the different cultural things that we do. And I'm not going to rattle them all off because there'll be nothing left for others on the call. But my personal journey was one of having to have grown up. And one other thing I didn't mention, I grew up in a household where I had strong female role models. Both my grandmothers were college educated. Both my grandfathers were laborers. So, and my mom was also was training to be a teacher and ended up having 4 kids and raising us. But so in my early childhood, she was not in the workforce. She entered it as I moved into middle school. But women in leadership positions were common in my family. And so I didn't grow up not seeing women as capable of doing anything a man could do.
Thank you, Steve. Rodney, your thoughts?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, so good morning, and thanks again to the Chamber for putting on this series of webinars. I think it all starts with having some good dialogue and conversation on what has become a very important topic. Like Steve, my journey is pretty similar. I was born actually in West Africa, Ghana to be specific, but my family moved from Ghana to Botswana. And if you don't know where Botswana is, it's a small landlocked country right above South Africa. And this was in the late 70s, early 80s that we moved there as a young child. And so my siblings and I were raised there. And just to give you a quick history of that part of the world, I mean, this was the time when apartheid in South Africa was at its highest of times, and Botswana had become a safe haven for individuals who were trying to liberate South Africa, who were fleeing South Africa because of oppression and seeking refuge in Botswana. So at a very early point in my, I'll say, journey, I was exposed to struggle, to strive to difference. And Botswana too was a melting pot for multiple ethnicities and backgrounds. So as a child growing up, I grew up in a very culturally diverse environment. And I think that really shaped my mindset, my lens. I moved to the US as a young adult, preteen, for school. And it wasn't until that juncture that I came to really appreciate some of these differences and how they're called out sometimes publicly, because as a child growing up in Southern Africa, we to an extent didn't see race per se because it was so diverse. But my upbringing really influenced my ability to appreciate difference, all throughout my education process here. I was always surrounded by people who were different from me. When I got to college, I naturally, gravitated to be around people who were different from me because that was just my journey. But through that process, I also continued to mature and understand the environment that I found myself in as a young African American. In an environment where in a lot of instances I was the minority. I would add that I've been working with BG now, for about 18 years, and Steve Warner actually was one of the individuals that recruited me out of the University of Maryland. And we'll probably get into this later on, but there's a lot of power in having strong mentorship, individuals who are not necessarily from the same walk of life as you, who might be different from you, who you could also learn from. And my journey, my process has really been evolved and shaped through having different mentors and sponsors who don't come from the same background as me, but can shape my thoughts and perspectives. So I'll pause there in the interest of not taking too much time, but I strongly believe that one's background and journey and what you're exposed to really influences your view and perspective on this topic. And to the extent with which you can open yourself up to difference, I think helps moving forward.
Thank you, Rodney. Danielle, are you on and able to answer this question as well?
I am. Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. And thank you to the Chamber also for hosting this. And I think what we'll find out as we go through this entire day is that all of it begins with conversation. And if we don't have these conversations, we'll never grow. You know, on a personal note, much like Steve, I came up in a very diverse background in my childhood, not quite as diverse as Rodney's, of course. But I came up from an Irish working class home in Massachusetts, where I had friends of every ethnicity. My parents both worked, so they were very engaged in the community. I'm the youngest of 7 children, so diversity came very early because you had to fight for just about everything. But I really realized where the journey started when I joined my career profession, which I don't get to say as Rodney that I've been here for 30 years. I've only been with BG&E for 4 because I did 25 years prior to that in law enforcement. And I started before that in corrections in Massachusetts, and then did 25 years in the State Transportation Authority in Maryland as a police officer, retiring at the rank of a major. So I did have the chance to affect some change before I left, but gender equality was not something that was very prevalent in my career field. It wasn't particularly, it wasn't that it wasn't encouraged, it just there was no push for it. So my strive for diversity in the workforce began with gender equality first, and then moved into ensuring that we had equality across the board, at least in my department, and the change that I could affect there. Again, having strong parents who believed that everybody brought something to the table gave me a great sense of who I am and where I wanted to be. But like Rodney, I also had some wonderful mentors along the way. And I would say none that compare to what we have at BG&E for pushing the not only the equality, but the diversity across the board in the company. So I'm very proud to be a part of this team and to push our efforts forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Danielle. Frank?
Good morning, Sandy. First, I want to thank you and the Maryland Chamber for their invitation to participate on this panel today. My story is a lot like other African-American males. I was raised in Baltimore City, a family of 9, single parent. My mother was in the educational system, so education was really important to us. Dealing with the social issues relative to being a Black male, I've been subjected to police brutality, right, on many occasions. I've experienced systemic racism, being followed around in stores and being accused of shoplifting and things of that nature. But I was raised by a mother who was very strong. And she taught me to values and to love people and not to hate. And that helps me, and it has helped me a lot because it gave me the opportunity to look at a world that may be full of hate, but understanding that the power of love is greater than any hate that can be thrown at us. I'm very appreciative of being a part of Baltimore Gas and Electric. It changed my life. Like Rodney, Steve played a significant role in me being at BGE, especially in this role. I didn't want the role, supply diversity, and I love negotiating. But Steve as a mentor to me, he showed me the value of not just saving money for the company, but the impact that I could have in this particular role. My story on how I became an advocate inside of BGE for diversity and inclusion was unique in that in 2010, I was called to be an advocate for diversity and inclusion by BGE. And that was because the late Congressman Elijah Cummings, a great leader who worked tirelessly to empower Baltimore and Maryland businesses, sent an inquiry to BGE about the underrepresentation of minority businesses for the installation of smart meters in Maryland. And I was asked to work with our prime contractor to increase the level of minority participation on that contract. And here I am, 10 years later, happy ever after. You know, looking at corporate, it has taught me that corporations need a strategy and a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to build a culture where everyone can thrive, especially equity. Equity makes diversity and inclusion about social justice, about doing what's right systematically within the organization, which is visible at BGE from the board of directors to the support personnel, and reflective in the core value, policies, and the investments we make in the communities we serve.
Thank you, Frank. The next question I have, and Steve, I'd like to direct it to you and then followed up with some insights from Rodney as well. Why, in your view, is it a business imperative to have a diverse and inclusive workplace? Frank mentioned, for example, some of the supplier diversity initiatives. When you answer this question, could you provide some examples of major diversity and inclusion initiatives that you feel have had a very significant or profound impact?
Sure, happy to. So why is it a business imperative? I believe for a company to be successful, that you need to be able to attract the top talent to your company. And then when you get that talent inside, they need to be able to bring their gifts to help that company in pursuit of its vision and mission. And when I say by bring their gifts, all of their experiences, all of their insights, help the company see around the corner, understand how it's perceived by different market segments, understand how effective its communications efforts are, you name it. So you asked me to talk about a couple specific things that I think we've done that have been very helpful. I'll mention BGE and Exelon signed on to the United Nations He for She initiative. And what we did as a part of that specifically made commitments to monitor the various metrics within the company in terms of retention within different demographic segments, as well as pay equity provisions, which fortunately for a company like us being a meritocracy weren't an issue. But you know, when the world around you talks about an issue, your employees ask questions. And so we were able to put that data in front of them. One of the things we did is we asked each executive to hold listening sessions with all the women in their organizations. And those were tough for those leaders because one, they had to just listen. They couldn't solve problems, right? Typically leaders want to hear something, react to it, solve it immediately. They had to essentially be quiet, listen, get it all in, and then reflect. And then we did some action planning. And I think we're going to touch on this program a little later, so I'll leave it there. We also have a number of employee resource groups throughout the company. I sponsor the Baltimore chapter of the Pride organization. And why do I do that? I always consider myself an ally, but I also wanted to show through my involvement that it was important to the company that this group and who it represents are an important part of our workforce. And so what I was amazed by is by my own involvement, how many other allies then would come forward, right? So I saw the power in leading by example there. But we have a number of employee resource groups throughout the company, which I am a member of each one of them and try to get to as much of the programming as I can, because I find as a leader, the more insights I have, the more I continue on my journey of learning and understanding, the better leader I am. Rodney, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, certainly. This is a very powerful and key question, because it really speaks to what organizations really stand for and the fabric of those organizations. This diversity and inclusion and equity, actually, Frank touched on it, is a business imperative. Because if you think about it, and I'll use BG as an example, we were 203 years old. Like, we are a legacy company in a historic community, right? So at BGE, we really believe that our workforce needs to be representative of the community it serves, right? And why is that important? If you think about all the young people who look to our company and what they see, right? The potential that what they see may offer. That vision, that image is so powerful. Every year, we've now been hosting this process for several years, but we have these collaboratives with schools in the community, right? Because what we realized was that for a lot of individuals outside of our company, never really saw an opportunity for employment within our company, right? So we started a process to really introduce young people at a very early on point in their process, in their progression to what a career at BGE could potentially be. So whether it be internships with our VOTEC schools or high school internships, the potential. And I'll use this example. So as a candidate coming out of school, University of Maryland, College Park, I'll give my alma mater a quick shout out here. The utility wasn't seen as a very attractive place for engineers to go. And Steve can probably attest to this. Because typically people saw the utility as just this kind of archaic institution. More people were gravitating towards the DoD type, institutions, the Raytheons, the Booz Allen Hamiltons, the Lockheed Martins. But I fast forward my career now 18 years, and my experience at BGE has been bar none probably the much more better than it could have been had I gone somewhere else. I probably would not have entertained BGE or a utility had I not been exposed to it early on in the potential that it could offer. And from an internal perspective, even going down to things like how we conduct our interviews. For those of you that are listening in, you have to be intentional. There's a way to move with intentionality, and that equity word keeps resonating in my head. So this is about creating a fair and equitable process where everyone can compete, in a substantive way. So it could be as simple as making sure that you're when you post a job and people apply for the job, that you have a diverse representation of people who could potentially, compete and be successful in the job. Your interview panels, right? If you think about that, the diversity you have on the interview panels are important because you want to ensure that you are capturing multiple perspectives and that you have very different lenses as part of that process to ensure that the right candidate gets the role. So at BGE, we've focused on some of the fundamental blocking and tackling with intentionality to ensure that equity that was mentioned exists at all levels. And I'll end by saying this. So for example, in our field organizations, and I've had the opportunity to work with some of our field teams, great roles there, you can build very awesome careers. So BGE has been very intentional to ensure that as many people as want to really get an opportunity to work in that space have that opportunity, and that they know that these career opportunities exist in our company.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Rodney, for your insights. Frank, if I could direct a question to you, you lead BGE's Focus Forward Supplier Diversity Program. Can you give a brief overview of what that initiative is and tell us a little bit about the impacts of BGE's emphasis on spending on diverse vendors?
Sure. For BGE, it started with a goal. In 2009, BGE voluntarily committed to the Maryland Public Service Commission to allocate 25% of the company's supply managed spend with diverse suppliers. Now, it's one thing to set a goal, but it's another thing to make it happen. The goal is critical, but it's the plan to get to it that determines success. That's how the Focus 25 Supply Diversity Academy was born. In 2013, BGE partnered with the Maryland-Washington Minority Companies Association and launched the Best in Industry Focus 25 Supply Diversity Academy. Its aim is to grow diverse suppliers by helping them to successfully compete for scalable contracts in both the private and public sector. In addition, the initiative was named Focus 25 to keep all stakeholders focused on achieving that MOU goal of 25%. This 12-month academy consists of 6 sessions. Each session is preceded by a 30-minute networking period that gives our diverse partners one-on-one networking opportunities throughout the entire program. An overview of the program includes an orientation. Session 2, supply process and bid review. Session 3, strategies for becoming a seamless part of BGE's culture. Session 4, technical capacity building. We call it Ask the Expert. As a matter of fact, on this past Friday, we held this session, which was one of our first virtual collaborative. The session featured opening remarks by our CEO, Kareem Kuzami, and a panel of executive level subject matter experts who offered advice to our diverse businesses on how to navigate our business process and better compete for contract opportunities. Session 5 is small business development, strategies for capacity building and networking session. And session 6, fine-tuning our Focus Forward experience. And upon successfully completing the academy, we hold a graduation. You see, ultimately, the support of this program, programs like Focus Forward and other similar initiatives that help BGE exceed the Maryland PSC 25% goal by spending $257 million or 26% with diverse businesses in 2016. As a result of surpassing that goal, in 2017, we rebranded this program as Focus Forward to reflect BGE's continuing commitment to diversity and inclusion. I can hardly believe that since the inception of the Focus Forward Supply Diversity Academy in 2013, BGE has spent over $1.6 billion with diverse suppliers. In closing, I'm proud to say that in 2019, as a result of these efforts and our various business partners like you, BGE purchased $437 million in goods and services from diverse businesses, which represents 42% of the company's total supply managed business, its highest ever. And that's a $111 million year-over-year increase, 34%. And I think we get it, because we are focused on seeing our local business partners as not only suppliers, but as customers, commercial and residential. In Maryland last year, BGE spent $217 million with diverse businesses. And in case you didn't know, in 2019, BGE also spent an additional $223 million with non-diverse businesses in Maryland, large and small. That's hundreds of small businesses, from restaurants to florists, caterers, printers, dry cleaners, car wash, mini mart, bakeries, delis, and even a peanut shop, and many more businesses, for a combined spend of $440 million with Maryland businesses in 2019. Wow. Talking about being open for business in Maryland, that's lots and lots of jobs. Staying focused on the true value of DE&I and its overall impact on the community we serve. That's why over the years, BGE has received local and national awards for our diverse supply diversity efforts that we greatly appreciate, but we recognize that we still have a long way to go, and there's so much more work to be done. So our focus is forward as we remain committed to building relationships and doing business with all suppliers that support BGE and deliver economic benefits to the community we serve throughout Maryland.
And Sandy, if you don't mind, I'd like to just piggyback on what Frank talked about from a senior leader perspective. When we first started this journey, many folks thought we'd pay a cost premium. We do not. Many people thought we might have a decline in reliability or safety or you name it. We did not. We've improved as a company. We're more cost effective today than when we started. We're more reliable today than when we started. We have higher levels of customer satisfaction, higher levels of employee engagement. So you can do, it's an and. This is not a trade-off. This increasing supplier diversity, like increasing employee engagement and employee inclusion, is an additive function to your company. Sandy, it looks like you're muted.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Steve. Danielle, I think at the beginning of this discussion, Steve mentioned the he for she pledge. BGE and all of Exelon have signed on to the he for she pledge. What does that mean, and how has this pledge changed the culture of the company and from your perspective?
Thanks, Sandy. So the he for she pledge is a UN women initiative. It invites people from around the world to stand together and create a bold, visible force for gender equality. It really speaks that men need to support women, women need to support men. It's a human for human initiative at its very root, but it's based on gender equality. Exelon took that in 2017 when our CEO, Chris Crane, signed the pledge, and he pledged the company to create a diverse workforce. And we were the first energy company with a primary US-based operation membership to sign that pledge. And it wasn't just a signature, it was a commitment. It was a commitment for the entire company, and it's been drilled down since the signing of that pledge. What happens is it gave the commitment for pay parity for women and retention of men and women alike, and a huge investment to STEM programs for women in the region where we could work with our UN women partnerships. And then we drove that down even further, and BGE jumped on. Steve signed the pledge in, I believe it was 2018, and I apologize if I have that wrong, Steve, but we started our journey in force in 2018, developing that from the top down, as all good programs need to come to fruition. And it was pushed down through the executive leadership, where we held listening and learn sessions with our employees. All female employees were invited to attend. And it was a year-long event where executives had to do, as Steve mentioned earlier, listen. They had to listen. It wasn't their fix-it time. It wasn't to make a plan or a roadmap. That would come later. What they did in that entire year is listen and hear what was going on in our company, hear concerns, and put them into workable assets for us. How can we make this work going further? And then we drilled it down even further in 2019, and we had a gender equality summit. And it sort of laid the base for all employees to know where BGE, Exelon as a company, stood in this global initiative. And it's the initiative to keep drilling down each time with this. Currently, BGE has programs going out through the next couple of years to ensure that this is all the way down to the newest employee who comes on board. It can't just be a leadership commitment. It can't be Chris Crane's signature on a pledge to the UN Women. It has to be drilled down from the top, and it has to continue. Those conversations have to continue. BGE listening and learning sessions are where we as a company are growing from. We heard what was said, and now we're putting those into action. At the beginning of, or in the middle of last year, we developed programs in unwanted behavior and fear, which is one of my specific areas that I've been championing, so that we can do, we've rebranded it to be creating an inclusive work environment. And we go out, and that is drilled down from our field employees. So it's no longer Danielle from security or my counterparts that have made this commitment. We now brought it down to field level people to ensure that they push the message. They hold the sessions with their peers. They hear the conversations. And again, it's that listening, what's going on. And some of it was a lot of misinformation, what they believed he for she was, what they believed the concept of it was, and they thought it was an us against them, which absolutely unequivocally is not. It's a human for human initiative. It's to ensure that there is equity and parity across the board for both men and women. So once you sort of peel those layers back, then the conversations can really begin to happen. We have other sessions for contractor and customer interaction. We have women in the field sessions, women's development, which is another huge portion of it, with mentoring and full development and support. We talk about unconscious bias and where it stands in it, and in the workplace, where it stands in your life. And each of these commitments brings us to a point where we can can have these deep, robust conversations. And ultimately, I think it's helped us as a company as we've gone into 2020 and into the issues that we now face with equality and racial disparity, to have those conversations on a much more raw basis and bring us forward. So we're not there completely. Absolutely not. We are done very well on our retention and our pay parity. Those initiatives are met. It's the human beings now that we're continuing to push forward and make sure that the conversations do not stop. And what started as a global initiative has to be brought down to the root level. Thanks.
Yes, Sandy, if I could add, to that, I happen to be one of those BG executives that participated in the listening and learning session, and Steve mentioned that. At the time, I led an organization that probably had the highest number of women in the BGE organization. So I had the most number of sessions. And I'll tell you, it was really hard to just listen and not try to fix things. But then what was eye-opening for me was just the learning and how I even evolved through that process. One of the great things about our company is that we are 203 years old, but one of our curses too is that we're 203 years old, right? We are a very legacy company. And what I heard in those listening and learning sessions was twofold. That we're not perfect, that our history is somewhat marred with some things that we're not too proud of. But I also heard and learned that we've grown a lot as a company, that our culture has changed. And if you think about the utility, right, we're an engineering company, but we're also a company that has a lot of field resources, right? And we really wanted to create this environment where women have the fullest opportunity to participate in all aspects of our company, whether it be in the engineering side or the field side. And so to the point that Danielle made about women in the field, and some simple things like being able to climb a pole and do all the things that we expect our employees to do. How are we being intentional to ensure that we're not creating barriers of entry for women in environments that are great paying jobs? And so that session really, I thought, was great that we did that, but the learning that we took from it will forever continue to shape our trajectory moving forward. We're not perfect by any means as a company. We know we still have a lot of work and growth to go through, but the important thing is that we're learning and we're listening and we're open to where our shortcomings are.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Rodney, for that insight. I'm just going to do a quick lightning round because I know we have some other questions we want to get to, but if there was a single piece of actionable advice to companies that you would give considering how to create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace, what would that be? Let's go in this particular order. Let's start with Frank, and then Danielle, and then Rodney, and then Steve.
Wow. For BGE, I think my advice would be helping Maryland businesses grow and becoming more competitive to other organizations in smart business, because it helps us serve our customers better and strengthening our communities. You see, as we've grown our network of diverse and non-diverse business partners through initiatives such as the Focus Forward program, BGE, as Steve mentioned earlier, has recorded its best performance in reliability, safety, financial, and customer satisfaction. In fact, the Focus Forward Supply Diversity Academy is an investment worth making, and I would strongly encourage all other companies to join our efforts. Sandy?
Yeah, thank you. Danielle? Thank you, Frank.
So, thanks, Frank. I think listening. The key is listening and not trying to solve it, right? Whether you have a problem or you just want to be a better company, you just want to be a better leader, listen. Listen to what's truly going on without trying to solve it. And it's probably one of the hardest things that any leader will ever do is not solve the problem before you've heard all of the inside of it. And then develop a communication plan going forward, but it's got to include the employees. Leadership can be the sponsor, but it really has to be a grassroots level so that you get true change.
Yes, Sandy, I'll say, really for any leader that's on this webinar, don't allow the fear of making mistakes get in the way of starting the conversation in your companies. I think what we realized, and we just unleashed that probably a couple of years ago, was that, there tends to be fear that someone might say the wrong thing, you might offend someone. And I think if you create that environment at the onset, that people acknowledge that you will make some mistakes, you will say some things that may not be the right things, but they're being said out of the spirit of learning, and that you cultivate that culture where people can feel safe to begin the dialogue. I think that begins the process. So don't allow fear of mistake to get in the way of starting the dialogue and having the true raw conversation.
And Sandy, I would add that you need to be intentional when, after you get all your input, you need to be intentional about making whatever it is, the investment, the change, whatever you're going to do. Just like any other business imperative, you're going to have metrics to track. You're going to have program goals, objectives, people that are accountable for different activities. Things just don't, if you want a different outcome, you have to change something about the way you're operating. And so in all the things that we talked about today, in every action we've taken as a company to try to make it a more inclusive work environment, we've set out goals, game plan, and we're intentional about establishing the accountability frameworks required to be successful in each of these initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. At this point, we'll open it up for questions. And if I can turn this over to Christine for some additional questions for our panelists.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to all of our panelists today. So one of the questions that came in, it seems very simple, but I have a feeling it's pretty complex. What's the best way to get your employees comfortable enough to begin the conversation with you? How do you set them at ease?
So I guess I'll start there. I think it kind of has to do with what Rodney talked about, not being afraid to make a mistake, right? Showing some vulnerability. Many leaders believe they have to have all the answers to every question. There are some techniques you can use, like asking for, tell me more, right? When someone brings a question, say, to make sure I fully appreciate the context of what you offered us. Can you give me an example? Can you tell me more about your experience? There will be some learning, I guarantee you, some learning for you in what comes after that follow-up question. So as opposed to trying to formulate the answer when the person's still speaking, like so many leaders do. That's a habit you have to unlearn, and you'll become a stronger leader. But that's why I'd start with that, not being afraid to not have all the right answers. Anybody else want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think, and my camera is giving me some issues here. I think you need to be okay being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So Christine, that like vulnerability-based leadership is so key on this topic. And I think as leaders, we always have this desire to want to be on point and to want to have it all together. And the reality is it's a journey for all of us, including the leaders. So accepting that, to Steve's point, you won't have all the answers, but then more importantly, being okay, being vulnerable in front of your employees, because it's that vulnerability that will unlock your team members and open them up to the place where they feel safe enough to be able to engage and dialogue on this topic. And then secondly, don't be defensive. Leaders are always, we're sometimes so quick to want to counter something, and we have to realize that on this topic, we won't have all the answers. So not being defensive and being vulnerable, I think, are two key elements that as leaders we need to display.
Anyone else? Okay. The next question we have is what's the best way to get your employees to talk about how they feel about their experiences in the workplace? Anyone?
This is Danielle. I'll jump in on that one. And a lot of that's going to start with the conversations. It's going to be very difficult if you haven't had conversations prior to getting into the deep stuff. If you haven't set that stage to get somebody to truly open up to you. As Rodney said, showing your vulnerability is not a bad thing. Having all the answers is not a bad place to be. It's a journey towards a new learning environment for each person. So if those conversations are happening, more importantly, if they're not happening, start them now. Start them. Don't start with the big stuff. Start with the everyday conversations on life. I can't ask you where you stand on racial injustice before I've ever asked you how you are as a person. So starting those conversations early and often. And that does not mean spending your entire day having these conversations, but working with it. And some people are very uncomfortable in this space. So get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I mean, to put it simply, I would just say, as everyone mentioned earlier, listening is critical to building that trust. And in addition, you have to seek to understand and don't neglect to take action and to follow up appropriately. Sometimes we forget to follow up, and that just adds to the lack of trust that occurs. So I think it's important that leaders take time up front to develop that trustful relationship with the employees, and leadership will take care of itself, and you'll see businesses' performances only increase by engaging your employees.
Great. I have another question. Do you feel that surveying and data collection from the employees is an important aspect of creating a pathway forward?
I think for us, yes, it has been. I'll put it this way. If you're trying to give someone direction somewhere, you need to know where they're starting from, right? And if you're trying to understand anything about your business in terms of a sales goal, any kind of goal, you need to know what's your baseline. And so some form of measurement is important. It's not all in the measurements, but they are a key part.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you want to survey or collect your data in the most organic way you can, right? Because the baseline is really important, and you also want to understand where your team members, employees stand on a particular topic, or their current perspective on a topic, because that will help you determine and outline your path forward. And so it's going to be vitally important for companies to really understand where people are on topic to shape how you move forward.
Christine, working in a company with engineers, I have embraced the value of data. Nobody likes data more than an engineer, but sometimes it's getting the humanistic portion of that data and putting that in. Sometimes it's very difficult to measure. So I actually have really embraced that data does give you a baseline and it gives you a place to go from. So those companies that are not as data driven as a utility maybe work towards getting that baseline and having something very tangible to build upon.
It's important because it can sometimes be a long journey, and you want to be able to show progress to keep people engaged, right? So some type of measurement, I would encourage you, no matter how hard you think that is, to put together. I think would add value to you.
And if I could just amplify one point, and Danielle touched on it. It's not all quantitative data.
Correct.
The qualitative data on this topic is actually more important, because it speaks to the feeling, how people feel about something, right? Exactly. So start to get the feeling through the qualitative data, and that will shape your process forward.
Great. Thank you. So the last question that we have, it is an observation and a question. We can see that this is a very much a top-down, leadership-driven experience at BG&E. Can you also have it be bottom-up? Anyone?
So I'll start, but anybody can jump in here. My perspective is a change like this has to be happening at multiple levels simultaneously. The picture I want to paint for you is if you were trying to move a bookshelf that was still loaded with books and you only applied pressure at the top, it would fall over when you tried to move it. If you applied only pressure at the bottom, it might be difficult, but if you applied pressure at all along the entire side of the bookshelf, it would move much easier. And so our efforts are not just senior leaders. They are leaders at all levels, as well as employee involvement, as a number of our speakers have talked about today. But I do think it's incredibly important to make sure that your leadership team possesses and shares the values of where you want to take your company. And if not, you need to be intentional about changing that leadership team, either through training or replacing, such that you end up with a company that will reinforce on a day-to-day basis the behaviors that you want to see in your workplace, and appreciate the correct behaviors along the way. Danielle, looked like you were going to jump in there.
No, but you most eloquently put it all right out there. I think I couldn't agree with you more on that.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's top down. I think it's culture, right? So the executives and the leaders, I think, are playing a huge role at BGE in trying to start and stimulate that culture, right? But the culture as it evolves is really the people that make up the organization. So we've been very intentional to include a lot of voices beyond the senior leadership team. So we have panel sessions similar to this that include our first line supervisors, that include individual contributors, because we want to get as many people into the conversation early on as possible. So yeah, it's a little bit of all levels, and as the culture grows and forms, more voices are in the conversation, and before you know it, it's our culture, not necessarily the leadership culture.
Yes.
Very good. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to the entire BG&E team that participated today. Your insights have been rich. They're going to be helpful to all of our small to mid-sized businesses and anyone who's interested in taking action and making change happen within their organization. I want to remind everyone today that this was recorded. In a few days, the recording will be up online on the Chamber's website. We will also have resource materials that were provided by BG&E that we will post there as well. So this will have evergreen content that you can then pass on to your colleagues and friends. Again, this is a 6-part series. We thank BG&E for underwriting the series. The second program will be in September, probably the 3rd week of September. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.